Hey friend, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you how to mix bass to sound clear and powerful in your track. I have a raw bass track pulled up here. We're literally going to go through step by step to getting this bass guitar to sit inside of our track. So let me hit play here. You can hear what our raw recorded bass sounds like for this song. So that's our raw DI bass here. That's usually what I'm tracking these days for bass guitar is just the DI. It's the cleanest signal. It has the least amount of stuff going on, and it gives us the most flexibility inside the track. So the first move I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click on the track and I'm going to come down to duplicate complete. So I'm just going to create a copy of this bass DI, and just for name's sake, we're going to call it bass amp. If I did have an amp track, this is what I'd be doing to the amp track. But what I'm going to use these two channels for is to isolate the bottom end and isolate the top end on the bass guitar. One of the hardest things when it comes to mixing bass guitar is getting the low end right. If we can first isolate the bottom end and at least get it separated from the rest of the frequency range, we'll be that much further ahead to controlling our bottom end. So here's just our DI signal now, and I'm going to pull in an EQ here. And we're going to isolate just the lows on the DI. All right, so that's just our DI signal, and all we've done here is rolled off everything above 182 hertz with a low pass filter. I changed it to 24 dB per octave slope here, just so the crossover isn't too big when we do the opposite to our bass amp track here. I don't want too much building up here in the low mid, so a more intense crossover here. More intense slope is going to make sure that we don't emphasize this mid-range as much when we bring up our amp. So that's just our DI. We're going to use it as just our bottom end. It gives us a clean low end signal. If you did have both a DI and an amp track, I would recommend picking the DI track to be just your bottom end because it's going to have the least amount of saturation or amp sound, all that other fussy stuff that can kind of ruin your bottom end sometimes. So coming over to our so-called amp track here, just a duplication of our bass DI. I'm going to put on an EQ here, and I'm just going to do the opposite. I'm going to roll off everything below where we were at here, 182 hertz on our DI. So we'll roll off everything below 182 hertz here on our amp. So now we have just the mid-range and just the top end on our bass guitar. This is going to help us get all the articulation, and it's going to help us hear our bass guitar inside the track. We have one track now that's just the bottom end. So just our DI is just the bottom end here, and then our so-called amp track or our duplication is just the top end. The first thing we're doing here is just splitting the frequency range. Here's both of them together now. Helps us get a little bit more focus in the bottom end and the top end before we do any kind of processing further down the road. Now that's our DI and our amp track here, and I've got both of these tracks sending into the bass bus, which is just this bus here, so I can do some processing on both of these tracks together at the same time. So both of these, the DI and the amp, are feeding into this bass bus here. I'm going to add an EQ. We're going to see if we can take care of some of the extra frequencies hanging out in the sub area. So that's the first thing I'm doing here, is pulling in a high pass filter, rolling it up to about 70 hertz here, just to tame some of the frequencies jumping up in the sub area. If we can roll off some of that excess energy down there and tame the super, super lows, it'll help us focus in on the fundamental on our bass guitar, which is more this 60, 70, 80 hertz area. That's what we want to feel in our chest. I don't so much want to hear that 30, 40, maybe a little bit of 50, but I really want to focus in on this 60, 70, 80 hertz area. So just taming some of that sub can really help us focus more on the fundamental of our bass guitar. Now, there is some buildup, it feels like, around 200 to me. So we're going to come in next with just this mid band here and see if we can tame some of that excess energy in the low mids here. Just about a 3, almost 4 dB cut at 200 hertz. You can hear it drastically cleans up the sound of our bass and gives us so much more clarity in the low end and the mid range. So just take a listen here. I'm just going to bypass this EQ. We've got our high pass and we've got this small cut here at around 200 hertz. Take a listen to how this changes our bass guitar. So without and then with. Sounds way more focused and way more clear with just these two moves in from the beginning. Now, before we jump in and start boosting a whole bunch of stuff here, top end for articulation, low end for some weight and some power, I do want to get this bass guitar compressed and I want to get it even. It seems very popular these days on YouTube to like not compress bass for some reason. I don't know what that's about. If you're using a bunch of pedals and stuff on the way in, I guess for sure go for it. Don't compress your bass guitar. But if we zoom out here, we can see there's some peaks and there's some valleys on this bass guitar. It's just a straight DI. So it's an even performance if we look at it, but it's a human being playing, right? There's going to be some harder hits, there's going to be some peaks, there's going to be some valleys, and there's going to be some inconsistencies frequency-wise. We want to pin down that bottom end, we want to get it in one place, and we want to make sure our bass guitar stays parked in one place so we can set it with our kick drum and it doesn't move all over the place. That is one of the biggest enemies of a mix, is your bass guitar and your bottom end moving all over the place. I really love reaching for this FET style compressor here. It's Studio One's 1176 emulation here. I've got the attack at 0.55 milliseconds, so super, super fast attack, but it's medium slow for this unit here. 4:1 ratio and all the way fast on the release, 50 milliseconds. I'm just gonna dial this up till we're really holding our bass guitar in place. So I'm going to shoot for maybe like 7 dB of reduction on some of these bigger hits here. So you can hear we're doing like 7 to 10 dB reduction on some of these bigger hits on the bass guitar, really clamping down on it. And to me, I've always kind of liked treating bass guitar like mixing a vocal, where you want to get it parked in one spot and you don't want it moving all over dynamically through the mix, at least volume wise, but frequency wise as well. We want that low end in one spot. And to me, this is the first step, is just pinning down the whole bass guitar to make sure it stays in one spot with some compression. And you can hear there's some breakup and some distortion going on because of how hard we're pushing into this compressor. And it's one of the reasons I like using this compressor on bass guitar, is because of that breakup. Don't be afraid of a little bit of distortion and a little bit of breakup on the bass guitar. When we slide this into the track, that little bit of distortion is going to help us hear and discern the bass up above the rest of the mix here, right? We've got a lot of guitars, full drum kit, keys, vocals, a lot of stuff going on. A little bit of breakup, a little bit of distortion is going to help us hear our bass guitar. So one more time, with and without the compressor here. To me, this also adds an extra level of clarity. I feel like it pulls down some of the honkiness in the mid-range, which is kind of cool. It's just a nice effect of having a more analog style compressor like that. So those are our first two pieces here. Now, sometimes I'll go back to this EQ and I'll start boosting top end, but there's some clickiness and some clackiness going on the bass. So I'm going to pull in a multiband here first. If you don't have a multiband compressor stock, or if you don't want to go out and buy a multiband compressor, Studio One has one stock, which is really, really nice. You can actually take advantage of the frequency split trick to compress the bottom end and the top end on the individual tracks. We're just going to do it here on the actual bus, and I have a preset to start with as well, which is low end comp. It's just two bands here. We've got the low band, which is everything below 180 hertz, and then the top end is everything above 180 hertz. They both have the same settings going on, 20-to-1 ratio, and then fastest attack and fastest release. All this means is we're pretty much going to be limiting these frequency range. We're going to pull it down so we get rid of that clickiness and that clackiness and it doesn't jump out in the mix. And we're going to pull the bottom band down so we hold the bottom end in one place. So it's going to sit really, really nicely. It's going to sit nice and tight with the kick drum. And then fast attack and fast release, we want to get in and we want to get out as fast as possible. I don't want to get in and then hold on to the bass guitar and then overly compress the next note that comes in. I want to grab the notes and I want to let go as fast as possible to get ready to grab the next one. We're going to look at the bottom end first here. So I'm going to solo up this 180 hertz and below, 20-to-1 ratio, and I'm going to start pulling down this threshold. So we're not overly compressing the bottom end here. We're not getting a whole bunch of distortion and we're not completely flattening it. We still have some dynamic range to it and we still have some emphasis on notes, which we want to preserve the performance of the player, but I've pulled the threshold down enough here that it's kind of setting a ceiling for the bass guitar. And we're not seeing huge dips in the bottom end, and we're not seeing huge jumps or peaks in the bottom end. It's kind of evening things out to make sure our low end feels super, super powerful and consistent. I'm going to move over here now. We're going to look at 180 hertz and above, and we're going to see if we can control some of that fret noise and some of that clickiness. I've actually got the thresholds, excuse me, pretty even here. They're both at negative 31.2, which sometimes if it works out like that, it's really, really nice that we can kind of set the bottom end and the top end even and then do any kind of boosting that we need from there. I'm going to get the low end handled, I think, before we come back and boost top end, but that's our multi-band there to get our bass guitar super, super even. I'm going to pull an EQ, place it at the very, very end of the chain, and we're going to start boosting some bottom end, about 80 hertz here. Let's see if we can add some weight and some power to our bass guitar. Now that's a massive boost there, about 8.5 dB at 80 hertz, but feel how consistent and how powerful our bottom end is there because we've done this compression. We did our FET style compressor on the entire bass, and then we used our multiband compressing the frequency ranges to hold things in place. Now our bass guitar is super, super even, so when we boost up this bottom end, it stays so consistent and so powerful. So listen one more time. I'll A-B this boost at 80 hertz. That's all the bottom end power and all the bottom end weight we want to pack into our bass guitar. So now that we've got our bottom end sorted, I like to do top end sometimes last on bass guitar. I'll get the low end right and then kind of come back to the beginning of the chain here on the bus and add top end to match the bottom end. Sometimes it's harder for me to add the articulation and then try and add the bottom end from there. I'll end up going too far or not adding enough. Here it's kind of easier to do it once everything's kind of ironed out in the bottom end frequency rise. So we're back on our first EQ. We're going to see if we need to add any growl in the mid range and any articulation up in the top end here. That's feeling good to me there. So I added a little bit of mid-range bite and a little bit of growl here around 700 hertz, 706 hertz, about a 3 dB boost there. This frequency range here between like 500 and 1K really helps the bass guitar slot nicely between electric guitars. So we've got a couple electric guitars, we've got some rhythms and some riff guitars going on, and then a lead guitar obviously. So a little bit of this kind of 700 hertz area really helps the bass guitar sit nicely with our distorted electric guitars. And then up on the top end here, up at about 4K, 3.95K, adding a big 10 dB boost here to bring up some air and some articulation so we can hear the bass guitar whether or not we're listening on big speakers. A lot of people listen on headphones or on Bluetooth speakers. You want to make sure you can hear the notes the bass is playing whether or not there's big subs going on. So this boost here really, really helps with that. And then to take it even further, I'm going to come back here. We're going to duplicate this amp track one more time, and we're going to call it bass distortion or bass dist. So we've got that same EQ that was on our bass amp. It's just isolating the top end here, everything above 180 hertz. And I'm going to pull in red light distortion here. We're going to see if we can mess this up a little bit so we can blend it back in. That's pretty mean sounding right there. It's pretty nasty. It's pretty gnarly sounding. Let's pull this down and let's blend it back in against the rest of our bass guitar. So our clean DI, our clean amp signal here, everything's running through this same bus here. We're just going to listen and blend this distortion track back in to get some more top end and some more articulation out of our bass guitar, so it cuts through everything else that's going on. Very, very nice. Couple tweaks there as I blended it in. I've got it about -20, almost -21, but it's just giving me enough of that grit and that noise, so it gives our bass guitar some fuzz that's going to help it cut through inside of the mix. I looked at the multiband one more time here, just ironed out the bottom end and the top end a little bit more. We're down at -33 and then -31 here on the top end, just making sure we hold things in place. Felt like it was moving around still just a touch too much. And then I added some gain on the fader here, brought the level up. We're going to dump this back inside the track here now and see how it's sounding, see how it's sitting with the rest of the track here. So soloed and then inside the track. Cool, that's feeling really, really good there. I soloed it up with just the drums and the bass so I could make sure the bass guitar was sitting nicely with the kick drum. And I added just a touch more here at 80 hertz to make sure it had that low end thump that sat really nicely against our kick drum. That's feeling really, really nice there. A little bit of adjustment on the level as well. Let me A/B everything here for you on our bass guitar so you can hear where we started and where we ended up with our bass guitar. So we'll start with nothing going on, so just our solo DI, and then we will add our other elements in here, and we'll see where we end up with our finished bass mix. That's how we are getting our bass guitar to sound clear and sound powerful inside of our track. Remember, the first thing we are doing here, duplicating our DI track using the frequency split trick to isolate the bottom end on the DI and then isolate the top end on our so-called amp track here. Bussing those two together, and then on the bus, first EQ, rolling off some excess sub area, rolling down some low mids here to focus on the fundamental. We've got our compressor, our first compressor, our 1176, clamping down on the bass in its entirety, getting rid of some of those peaks, making sure our bass stays in one spot, using our multiband to compress against the bottom end to make sure our low end stays super, super consistent, using the top part of the multiband here to control some of the clickiness on the bass guitar. Then we're coming back here, adding some mid-range bite here so it sits nice with the guitars, adding some top end so we have the articulation and the fret noise so we hear all the notes on our bass guitar, and last but not least, boosting up the bottom end here on our bass bus to get that power and get that weight on the bass guitar. And final piece of the puzzle is we're blending in a bass distortion track to make sure our bass cuts through inside this mix. I hope that was helpful for you if you are looking to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process in its entirety and you really want to start to learn more about mixing a song from start to finish. I have just a tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's just a simple PDF guide that will walk you through the entire mixing process step by step to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any more of the guesswork. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.